Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to our lessons on the Hidayah of Imam al-Maraghinani. May God be pleased with him. So we were looking at this mas'ala, this question from the previous video, and I want to build on some of the interesting details that we find there. So we've talked about shahada. So we've talked about the idea of witnessing, which I've already done, so I'm not going to go back to that, but you can find that in the previous video. So let's read from here, inshaAllah ta'ala. So I want to read from here. ولا بد من اعتبار الحرية فيها لأن العبد لا شهادة له لعدم الولاية. Stop here. So condition number B, if you like, or condition B here, is this idea that the person who is witnessing the in'iqad, the conclusion of the marriage, they must be a free person. And this comes down to an important idea that we will see throughout fiqh, which is this idea of wilaya. You have to have what I call sovereignty of the self. You have to have freedom. I've used the word sovereignty over the self because sovereignty implies that you're able to do things, and it also implies that you're able to do things to other people. You're able to say things on behalf of other people. And remember, in the Hanafi madhab, language is very, very important. So I put a little statement here, al-wilayatu here, very, very important principle we should all remember. Al-wilayatu tanfizul qawli ala al-ghayri sha'a aw aba. Sovereignty is to be able to pass judgment or pass a statement upon somebody else, whether they like it or not. In other words, you have sovereignty over that person. So whether it's yourself, you have sovereignty over yourself, you have freedom over yourself, or you have the ability to apply a statement to get married or to marry somebody else off. For example, in this particular state, that's what wilaya is. So that's important to bear in mind. Because in shahada, the abd, the slave, la wilayata lahu ala nafsihi. The slave doesn't have any sovereignty over himself. And if he doesn't have any sovereignty over himself, فَلَا يَكُونْ لَهُ وِلَايَةٌ عَلَى غَيْرِهِ. He won't have wilaya over others. So to have wilaya over others requires that you have sovereignty over yourself. Okay? And shahada is from wilaya. To be able to witness something implies that that person has sovereignty over themselves. Okay? Because otherwise you can't, your witnessing has no bearing. So that's that one. The next one he mentions ولا بد من اعتبار العقل والبلوغ لأنه لا ولاية بدونهما ولا بد من اعتبار الإسلام في أنكحة المسلمين لأنه لا شهادة للكافر على المسلم. So I've just combined them. ولا بد من اعتبار العقل والبلوغ. So this is C and D, which is that you have to be sane and mature. And that simply goes back to the simple principle that we have identified here, which is this idea of wilaya. And then I've talked about here about Islam, E, letter E, which is that a person who witnesses the wedding has to be a Muslim when, now Hidayah has made an important point here. This is obviously when it comes to being a witness over the marriage over two Muslims. And he explains why. لأنه لا شهادة للكافر على المسلم. There is no shahada for a disbeliever over a Muslim. And this, of course, is tied to, again, and Hanafi's understanding of the literal statements of God in the Quran. Allah says in Surah An-Nisa, verse 141, وَلَن يَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ لِلْكَافِرِينَ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ سَبِيلًا. Allah does not place for the disbeliever upon a believer, upon the believer, a way. In other words, Muslims are always supposed to be in a position of moral superiority by virtue of their faith. So this is important for the conditions of a marriage of a Muslim, and specifically we're talking about the coming together of two Muslims. In the next video, inshallah, we'll talk about when a Muslim, for example, marries a non-Muslim. We'll talk about that next, but this is about a specific scenario of two Muslims getting married to each other. Then Sahibi Hidayah moves on. ولا يشترط وصف الذكورة حتى ينعقد بحضور رجل وامرأتين وفيه خلاف الشافعي رحمه الله تعالى وسيعرف في الشهادات إن شاء الله تعالى. So this is here F. We do not make it a condition that only males can witness the wedding. You can have one man and two women as a minimum to witness the wedding or the nikah. And he just mentions here there's a khilaf of the Shafi'is, so I'll put an S there for Shafi'is. We'll talk about this in detail. They say that a woman alone cannot witness without a man. So you need a man there, basically. A woman on her own, or two women, for example, cannot witness. Yeah. So you need, for example, two women would not be enough. Or in this case, four women. You need a man there for them. We'll talk about this, inshallah, in later videos. I think that's quite straightforward there. And then it becomes a little bit more interesting, if you like. The conversation takes an interesting turn, and there's an interesting discussion that takes place. And this is the next one which I want to look at. So let me read it for you from here. ولا يشترط العدالة حتى ينعقد النكاح بحضرة الفاسقين عندنا خلافا للشافعي له أن الشهادة من باب الكرامة والفاسق من أهل الإهانة. So first of all, Imam Marghinani mentions that we don't make it a condition that the person has to be a just or morally upright person. So if two fasiqeen, immoral people, witness the wedding and they fulfill all the conditions that we've mentioned above, then the nikah is complete. Imam Shafi'i, may Allah be pleased with him, takes a different position, and he says no, because he explains why. Because shahada is this idea of ikram, this idea of giving honor and dignity. We should not give this to a fasiq, because ihana should be a way of showing that person that you're such an immoral person, you should not be witnessing this wedding. We shouldn't allow your witnessing to count. That's Imam Shafi'i's position, and it sounds very, very sound, like it's a really good reason. But when we have to respond, so we give two responses to Imam Shafi'i. Remember, Imam Shafi'i's position is that it's witnessing is some form of honor, and we should not be giving this honor to sinful people, fasiqeen. And there's a hadith that they have as well, akrimu shuhud, the witnesses should be honored. And so we have to now respond to this. So this is how we respond. Walana, this is our response. You see the dialecting taking place here. And we give two responses. I've labeled them A and B for you. So I've written them here. Let me read the Arabic for you. وَلَنَا أَنَّهُ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْوِلَايَةِ فَيَكُونُ مِنْ أَهْلِ الشَّهَادَةِ وَهَذَا لِأَنَّهُ لَمْ يُحَرِّمْ ولاية على نفسه لإسلامه لا يحرم على غيره لأنه من جنسه ولأنه صلح مقلدا فيصلح مقلدا. Okay, so I'll just stop there. I'll stop here actually. Just got a little bit forward, but I'll just stop there. So it's very simple. We say, and we go back to this principle. Remember, we always tie it back to principle. We say, well, you have sovereignty over yourself. It doesn't matter if you're a fasiq. There's nothing in the Sharia that prevents a fasiq person from being a witness. And so if you have sovereignty over yourself, you have wilaya over yourself, and by virtue having wilaya over yourself, then you have the wilaya over others. you're able to witness other people's weddings. So there's no reason for us to deny that person, even if they're immoral or less than upright, to deny them being a witness. They're a Muslim, and by virtue of being a Muslim, they're from the same genus. So for us, it's very much a capacious understanding that we don't want to make things more difficult than they necessarily need to be. And in fact, in some books, they actually mention this principle here. وفي اشتراط العدالة لهم فساد كبير وفتنة عظيمة. That if you're going to make this a condition and you say, well, from now on, everybody needs to be the most moral and upright person, you're actually creating another problem, which is that marriage is meant to be easy. It's achieving something good, which is bringing people together, protecting them from zina, the things that we've talked about in previous videos. But if you're going to raise the bar so much, you're going to make it difficult for people, and you're going to create a facade. This is a really important principle. I can't stress this enough, my friends, that sometimes over complicating, being over religious, and not thinking things through to its logical ends can create a bigger problem. So we want people to get married. We want people to be happy. We want them to be protected from sin. Why would we want to make it more difficult and create another problem when the same problem can be solved in an easier and a simpler way? So this comes to this idea of taking the simplest route. So you don't want this condition there, because if this condition comes about, you create a greater facade. I'm saying this because this is scholarship. This is what you call real learning, in that you're always thinking about the greater good. You never lose sight of what is it that you're trying to achieve here, and you don't create barriers, you don't create problems that actually damage or negate the very problem that you're trying to solve. So this is just something that I wanted to mention. And then in the Arabic, Imam Marghinani, point B here, who also mentions another point which I've read, that if you think about it, in a fiqh, so this is when you start bringing in knowledge from other areas of fiqh. So fiqh is, when you look at masail, it's never isolated. You're thinking about other masail and you want to maintain a sense of consistency. And we say that that fisq لا يخرجه من أن يكون أهلا للإمامة والسلطنة. That even when a person is fasiq, they can be an imam, a leader, they can be a sultan. And then, if you think about after the rightly guided caliphs, may Allah be pleased with all of them, Khulafa al-Rashidun, it was very rare that you would find anyone who was free from fisq. So this goes back to this idea I've mentioned here, this facade argument. And so while in there we have allowed even a person who's less than scrupulous, less than morally upright to become a leader, and then when you're a leader, you can appoint a judge. And what's a judge doing, my friends? The judge is witnessing. He's a witness to the parties in a dispute. And the fasiq leader can also be a judge himself. So he can appoint, because he has wilaya himself. This again goes back to this idea here. Because he has wilaya over himself, he's able to appoint people, become the qadi, for example, and he can become a qadi himself, and he can judge over others. He can become a witness. He can witness contracts. He can look at debates or arguments that will take place in a court of law. So what the Hanafis have done is they've responded to Imam Shafi'i, may Allah be pleased with him, with two very simple responses. One is based on an usul, which is this one, which they've derived from looking at all the hadith and the Quran and bringing it all together. And they've also looked at other masail, other scenarios from the chapters of fiqh. And so this is what we're talking about. And he says, وَكَذَا شَاهِدًا وَالْمَحْدُودُ فِي الْقَذْفِ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْوِلَايَةِ فَيَكُونُ مِنْ أَهْلِ الشَّهَادِ تَحَمُّلًا. And this goes to the final point, which is H. So mahdudul fil qadhf, if you remember, This was the person who was awarded a penalty for giving false witness, uh, in making accusations and giving false witness. They've been given a penalty. So we say, well, even a person who has been awarded a penalty for giving false witness, they can witness the wedding. So they can't tahammulan, they can take on the idea of witnessing. They can take on the fact of witnessing the wedding, but they can't take on what's called here al-ada, i.e. if it was presented to a court of law, it wouldn't be accepted. And this is because in Surah Nur, chapter number 4, Allah says that don't ever accept their shahada. تَقْبَلُوا لَهُمْ شَهَادَةً أَبَدًا. Don't ever accept their shahada. And so because of the verse in the Quran, وَلَا تَقْبَلُوا لَهُمْ شَهَادًا أَبَدًا, this verse is talking about this particular scenario, that because of the sin and because of the crime, and they must have repented, of course, but because of the crime of giving false witness, we won't accept their giving of witness ada'an in a court of law, but they can witness, they can do tahammul. And that makes sense. And again, going back to this idea that we want nikah to be as simple as possible. We want to lower the bar, but we also want to make sure that we don't fall foul of any scriptural mandates, anything that's mentioned in the Quran. Very, very fascinating, as you can see. كما في شهادة العميان وابن العاقلين, and he's talking about, well, the same thing applies. It is exactly the same. This idea of witnessing. You can witness something but not render it in a court of law. So this happens, for example, when it comes to blind people. They can witness the contract, but because it's difficult for the judge to accept the rendering in a court of law, because which way do you go? That makes it difficult. So it won't be accepted in a court of law. And also when it comes to someone who is a son of the two people who have got married, or child. So for example, somebody might have got married beforehand, got divorced from the previous marriage, they have children. Those children can witness that marriage. There's nothing wrong with that. But if it was to go to a court of law, it wouldn't be accepted there. Right? Makes sense. I'll stop there, inshallah ta'ala. I think I've covered everything that I need to. Lots going on here. Beautiful way of understanding Quran, Hadith, and bringing it all together. Please do share comments if you find this useful. Ask questions. If you have any other text that you want to bring into the conversation, bring it into the conversations, bring it into the comment box at the end. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.